Hi everybody, Vigorous Rapscallion here, and today I'm going to be showing you how to set up a very basic laser sight that you can attach to your guns that functions in VR. So let's take a look at it. I've got it attached to this little vector gun here. So it's got a line that points straight at whatever you're trying to hit, and it's also got a little glow effect wherever that line hits to give the player a little more visual feedback. It's very simple, it doesn't look very dynamic, and there's a lot you can do to make it look a bit more like a real laser sight, but for today we're just going to set this up, then in part 2 we're going to go over how to make it a little more dynamic. So without further ado, let's jump right in.
Okay, so the first thing we're going to need here is a new Niagara system. This is what we're going to use for the beam. So let's use selected emitters. Let's grab dynamic beam. That looks almost like what we want. Let's call this laser sight line. Open that bad boy up. So right now we've got this little doodad that's kind of appearing, glowing for a little bit, and fading out. We don't want that. We want it to be more or less static. So let's open up our settings here and let's fix that first. Go ahead and make that loop duration 0. And you'll notice that the beam got a lot brighter and whiter. That's because all of the particle effects are spawning at the same time and they're just staying there. We're going to fix that in a second, but let's just go through this in order. So next we want to change the size of the beam. We want it to be the same size as the range of our gun, so that's 2500. There we go. Now for spawn count here, like I said, what's happening is all these are spawning just at the beginning. So we can use a much lower number, and that should also help get rid of this little white effect in the middle there. So let's just start low and go up until it's visible. We can see it at 3. Let's try 4. I'm just going to do as few as possible. That's going to be the least process intensive. And I think just looks the best. So, keep on going down from there. All this you can leave the same. Now, this is the beam width here. So right now we do have the width of the beam getting wider in the middle and less at the end there. We don't want that. We want this to all be the same size. I know in reality, like a laser sight you'd get for a gun would start to diffuse as it got to the end. But let's just keep it as one value. So delete those 2 other keyframes, and this becomes how you set the beam width. You just move that up or down to get less or more. Because we're not dealing with a lot of particles here, and we're trying to be not process intensive, let's keep this pretty thin. It starts to look a little funky if it gets bigger, and it just doesn't look like a proper laser sight. So let's try making this... try 0.05. It's still visible. It's kind of hard to tell how big it's going to be, but we'll get a better sense of that when we attach it to the gun. Let's keep going through this. Now we've got our color just down here. You can change this to whatever you want. The only thing to sort of note here is that because this is an emissive color, it is going to be brighter than whatever you select. So you're probably going to want to pick a color you like and then desaturate it to get a laser that looks closer to that color. And you might have to shift some other things around too. Let's bring it into a deeper hue a little bit. And that'll give you something. Let's not use blue because I've got this set up in a daylight scene and blue's going to get a little bit lost, I think. But let's do something kind of fun and sci-fi. Let's do a green. I always loved the green laser sights in Alien vs. Predator. I think that was the first movie I saw that had green sights instead of the standard, like, 90s movie red. You know, it was an auspicious time. Okay, that's looking like a nice green line that we can attach to something. So let's go ahead and do that next. One last thing before we do that. In color here, you've got this little scale alpha, which the dynamic beam will have a default one that pretty much works for us. So what this is doing is just making the alpha lighter as it gets closer to the end of that. You could even make this more aggressive if you want. You could have that start falling off a lot quicker. But just so that we can see it easily in the scene, we're going to keep it at default. Okay, next I have a little simple line trace gun that I made earlier set up here. It's just getting its line trace from the muzzle location. So let's go ahead and add in a Niagara, whatever that is, particle system. There's our line. It's pointing in the wrong direction, so let's reorient that. And then let's move it up. It will just clip through geometry, so you could put it back there if you want. But let's not. So let's really get zoomed in here. And that needs to come up a little bit. There we go. And now it should look like it's coming out of the bottom of the muzzle. Let's move it back a tiny bit. And take a look. There we go. That's looking good. Nice green line. Now let's see if we could even get it a little less saturated. Really go for it. Get ourselves a nice kind of crisp, foresty green look. And that's better. I'm really liking the way that looks. Okay, let's see how it looks in VR.
Okay, so here we go. We got our gun with the laser attached. Let's pick it up. The laser is following, and that's great. Let's see if it seems to be following the line. And as you can see, it's hitting pretty much exactly where the laser is pointing. However, it's not very dynamic, and especially close up, you can tell it's just kind of clipping through geometry. You could see it coming out the other side there. We're not going to fix that part in part 1 of the video. We're going to do that in part 2. But one thing that really helps hide this, because you are going to want the line going into the object a little bit even after you fix that, is to create a glow effect around where it hits. And it also looks neat. So let's do that next.
So to achieve that glow effect at the end of the line, let's go back to our blueprint here, and we're going to use a spotlight. Let's go ahead and add one in. And let's call this laser hit light. Great. Okay, that's probably not going to work. We've got this big old gigantic spotlight here. So let's start modifying some values. So for spotlights, attenuation radius is usually going to be how far the light goes out in general. It is for a spotlight too, but that's basically going to affect the length. So you can just think of that as the length of the cone, if that's easier for you. I'm going to go ahead and set this to 100, and you'll see why in a minute. And we don't want this little glowy spot to be too big. So let's go ahead and make that just 4. So we've got a little cone coming out. That's honestly probably going to be too big for gameplay. But we're going to leave it at that for testing, just so it's really obvious, and then we'll give it a tweak. Okay, next, we don't have to worry about what direction or anything this is facing in, because we are going to be changing its location at runtime. But we do also want to probably turn off cast shadows here. That's just going to save a lot of resources. This thing really doesn't need to cast shadows. And we don't want it to be visible by default. Also to save resources mainly, so it's just not showing up until the player picks up the gun. So let's uncheck that as well. Then for light, let's go ahead and go into laser sightline here. Grab, oopsie, there it is. Grab our hex code. Close that. Go back here and just copy pasta that in. Oops, accidentally did it twice. There we go. So now we should be getting the same thing, because the spotlight's also emissive. You're also going to want a darker color. We might end up having to brighten it up, but we'll see in a second. Next, let's go into the event graph. And first we want to activate that light when we pick up the gun. So down here, we've got our on-grabbed logic. So at the top is when we pick it up. Let's just go ahead and grab the hit light there. And set visible. And then we want to do the same when we drop it. So here we want new visibility to be true. And then when it's dropped, we want visibility to go back to false. Next, we need to change the location of this depending on how far away it is from the gun, so that it'll be properly illuminating the objects we're pointing at. So let's use an event tick for that. And first we're going to need some information about where we should spawn the spotlight. So let's go ahead and get a line trace. There's a line trace by channel here. Then we're going to go ahead and use that muzzle location. So this is going to be set up very similarly to how you just set up a line trace for a line trace gun. Same thing, start at get world location, end at forward vector multiplied, not multiplied, multiplied. There we go. By whatever our range is. In this case, that's going to be 2500. So just 2 float there. Perfect. Then we just need to add that to our world location. And that's going to give us a hit coming out every tick that we can mess around with the information from. So what information do we want to get? Let's go ahead and break the hit result. We don't really care if this thing's hitting an actor or if it's hitting a piece of geometry. We want the same thing to happen. Next, we want to set the location of that component. So let's grab our spotlight. And we're going to set location and rotation. So let's just do set world transform. We'll just keep the scale the same. Go ahead and split that strut pin. Great. Wire that up. And now we could just get the location here, but that's not going to work for us. What's going to happen then is the spotlight will spawn exactly at that location, so it'll be basically shining straight at the object from wherever it hit it. We want it offset by some amount. So to do that, we're going to get our forward vector from back here, from our muzzle location. We are going to go ahead and multiply again, but this time by a negative number so that we're getting a location behind it. So let's make that -60. There we go. And then we just want to add that to the hit location, and that should give us our desired offset. So that's all we need for location. Then for rotation, we want it to have the exact same rotation as the muzzle location. So let's get rotation, world rotation there, and go ahead and wire that up. Then we're going to leave the scale the same, so now this should be spawning 60 Unreal units back from wherever it hits. That's why we had the attenuation radius set like we did at 100 before. I changed this earlier. So let's also change the intensity. I think it was about here by default. Let's try like around halfway and see how that looks.
Okay, so let's take a look. Still got the line coming out from it there. And when we point at something, we are getting a little faint green glow. It's a little hard to see because this is a pretty bright scene, but that'd be considerably brighter in a darker scene. A couple of other issues with it. One, I'd like it to be brighter than this. Two, especially close up, you could tell that that spotlight isn't coming straight from the laser sight. It's coming from the muzzle. So let's also make another reference so that that will be right in line with the sight.
So back in our settings here, let's first take a look at the laser hit light. Let's just bring that intensity the highest it will go. I'm not really sure what will happen. Maybe my headset will catch on fire. We'll find out. But if it's too much, we can always go ahead and bring it back down. Next, we want a new location here. So let's just copy the muzzle location, just duplicate that. And let's call this laser sight vector. And we're going to go ahead and move that down so it's in line with the laser sight. That looks about right. More, there we go. Then we're going to go into the event graph and unwire this muzzle location. grab our laser sight vector instead and just plug it back into everything. And let's see if that looks better.
Okay, let's take another look-see, see if it's looking any better. And yes, you can definitely see the glow a lot more clearly now, especially on those gray surfaces. I still need to tweak that a tiny bit, but it's essentially at the center of the laser there. If you point it straight down, you can see it still needs to come down a tiny bit, but good enough for government work. So that's all you need to do for a super basic laser sight. This is perfectly functional for testing your own games. If you don't want to use a line trace, it becomes pretty hard to hit things without looking through the sight there, so this makes it a lot easier. It does still have some problems, which we're going to fix in part 2. One, the laser will still go through things, even though that spotlight is set dynamically. And when you're really close to things, you can see the spotlight starting to come through the mesh of the gun. So we also want to change it so we can change the parameters of that spotlight a little bit, make it less wide so it doesn't intersect with the gun. But otherwise, it basically works. Stay tuned for part 2 where we fix all that up. Got another video coming out on cone traces. So in that, we're going to go over how to do firing cones, where you have some randomness in which direction the bullet is coming out of the muzzle from. We're going to do, aim assist, so basically creating a cone coming out of the muzzle and getting a hit off of that, making it easier for the player to hit things, so if they're a little bit off, it's still going to do it. And we're also going to go over how to set up a shotgun effect using that same system. So stay tuned for that as well. As always, thank you so much for watching. You have a great day.